everyone. I came here today to share a story. Although many of us are strangers, the topics discussed at this conference bring us together. Today our stories may intersect in different ways. Some part of my life may remind you of yours. I could actually discuss many of the Nurture the Dream topics as I stand before you, pregnant for the 5th time with only one living child. I know the pain of miscarriage, the devastation of child loss, and the struggles of life with a special needs child. I wasn't sure exactly what to talk about with you today, so I'm just going to share my story and hope that you can take from it what you need in your own journey. Clark was actually my rainbow baby. He was conceived 3 months after a miscarriage. I had it 11 weeks. I remember being uneasy throughout the early stages of my pregnancy with him. But as the months went on, he was a surprisingly healthy and typical pregnancy. There was never any indication that our world was about to be flipped on its head. Looking back, I'm glad that I didn't have any warning. I think because his pregnancy and birth were so normal, I fought for his life to be the same. Clark came into the world quite quickly, a week early in fact, which was a nice surprise for me. I had a very long, difficult labor with his sister Lena and was ready for the worst. Instead, Clark gave me the gift of an easy, quick, and beautiful birth. It was the kind of birth that makes you soon after forget about the pain of pushing a baby out of your body. Now, when I look back, and even when I talk it over with my midwife who attended Clark's birth, there were little signs that all was not perfect. When Clark came out, he was not able to clear his own airways and required several rounds of suction. His head was a little small, but still within the realm of normal. At that point, we still existed in that realm of normal. As we began our breastfeeding journey, more flags were raised about Clark's development. I had a difficult time getting him to latch, and his weight began to dwindle. I still remember the first time my midwife uttered the words neurological issues, but I quickly shooed the thought from my mind. He was just a slow feeder. We would get there. We started a regime of nursing and pumping and topping up. I was exhausted, but I was stubborn. Lena was exclusively breastfed, and so too would Clark be. I felt like a failure, but refused to give up. As the nursing continued in this fashion without much weight gain, it was time to add a pediatrician to our world. With the pediatrician came the scary world of growth charts and milestones, neither of which Clark was meeting. The doctor was worried about his small head size and his lack of eye contact. That neurological question was once again floating in the air. But for now, all we could do was watch and see, because the hope was that he was just a little slow to develop, and at the time, with time and patience, he would catch up. That hope began to dwindle when Clark was about 3 months old. This was the first time he gave us a sign that we couldn't ignore. His tiny little body began to spasm in my arms. It was subtle at first, but still so scary. We took him to our local ER, where we were told it might be epilepsy, but if so, the drugs we could give him risked stunting his development, and we were sent home. The spasms started to become more pronounced and much stronger after that. They were obviously causing him pain and frustration. One morning it was so bad I called our pediatrician in tears and begged for help. I rushed him to Cambridge and into the doctor's office. There the doctor got to witness Clark's distress firsthand. Our doctor immediately called McMaster Children's Hospital and asked that Clark be seen right away. McMaster did not feel that we needed to be seen that day, but my doctor sat me down and said, "Look, if this was my kid, I would go right now." I felt my world coming down all around me. McMaster listened to our words and performed Clark's first EEG. Nothing showed up in the testing, so they sent us home again with no answers. Our pediatrician insisted that Clark be looked over by a pediatric neurologist. He secured us an appointment, and back to Hamilton we went. This neurologist was kind and spoke lovingly with us and with Clark, so we were quite taken aback when at the end of the appointment he said, "Your baby might just have a bad brain." A bad brain. We were devastated. What did this even mean, and what were we to do? The neurologist informed us that Clark would be put on a waiting list for an MRI, a waiting list he would be on for 6 months to a year, unless we would like to drive him to the States and pay out of pocket. Once again, we were sent on our way with nothing but unanswered questions. That doctor infuriated us, to say the least. We began calling our family to let them know about yet another disappointing appointment. My brother and sister-in-law were extremely upset and informed us that they knew the head of neurology at Sick Kids quite well. She just happened to have a horse barn down the road from their farm, and they set up to talk about Clark's case with her. Within days, we were contacted by this wonderful doctor, and all she asked is that we get ourselves a referral from McMaster to be transferred over to Sick Kids. Going to Sick Kids was a very different experience for us. We walked into a team of doctors with a plan. They were going to admit us for a week and get to the bottom of Clark's symptoms to hopefully find a diagnosis. We underwent more EEGs, blood work, and other poking and prodding. We answered endless questions and told our story again and again to doctor after doctor. And then came the day for the MRI. I still remember this day so clearly. We had to take Clark down to the procedure room where they were going to put him under and perform the MRI. This was the first time we had to physically let him go. Matthew and I were told to go relax while the MRI was performed. They would call us when it was completed. We walked through the cafeteria together in a daze. I had a horrible feeling in my gut that something was very wrong. Matthew was as ever the optimist and held on to hope that this was still something that Clark was going to grow out of, and I wanted with all of my heart to believe him. The phone call came and we went to retrieve our little bundle as he awoke from his medical slumber. These were the last moments of normal for us. We went back and played with Clark in our little hospital room. I remember looking down at him in my arms and thinking, how could there be anything wrong with this beautiful little boy? But those thoughts were about to be dashed. No less than 10 doctors, residents, and medical students filed into our cramped hospital room a short while later with grim faces. I remember the feeling of dread setting in. I do not remember all of the details of what was said in that room because my own brain was shutting down. The hospital hadn't seen this condition in 10 years. It was so rare. They could not answer questions of whether he would walk or talk. They could not tell us his life expectancy. Life expectancy. I felt so small in that room. I literally felt myself shrinking away. I held myself in a little ball as it felt like the world was disappearing around me. I felt the gaze of 10 strangers as they watched for my reaction. Was this some sort of teachable moment? Was this really happening? Was this room full of people really necessary to witness the unraveling of a family? They soon realized that they had not made the best approach to delivering the news and filed back out of the room with one last piece of advice. Do not Google pontocerebellar hypoplasia. I couldn't breathe and started to panic as soon as they left. This was happening to us. You know how you hear all of the heartbreaking stories of family tragedy, children with cancer, children who need heart transplants, and you just say to yourself, thank God that's never happened to us. You watch on feeling like you are untouchable and just one of the lucky ones who would get to walk through this world unscathed. But no, in this moment, I was dealing with the harsh reality that this was happening to our family, to our sweet, loved, and wanted little boy. A social worker was soon sent into our room because I was losing it. We, of course, went to Google as soon as the doctors left our room and were met with a small amount of damning information. Our baby would never walk or talk, and his chances of living through childhood were gravely slim. I begged that social worker for help. I could feel my mind fighting to stay with me, to not break and shut down. I asked for some sort of anxiety medication to help me stay, to keep my mind from leaving, but because we were in a children's hospital, that request was denied. I could go next door to Mount Sinai and sit in their emergency room for a few hours in hopes that they would eventually help me. But how could I leave my baby and my husband in a time like this? I had to pull myself together for my family. At this moment, it couldn't be about me. I had to stay and face this. I had to learn to begin to accept this reality. When we got home from that hospital visit, it honestly felt like Clark had already died. In a way, we were right. There was a death. It was the death of the life we thought we were going to have, the death of expectations. When Clark was born, I thought about what life would be like with this new little boy. It was fun to dream of all the things Clark would do and who he would become. I dreamt of the adventures that Clark and Lena would have together. I thought of the typical things. Would they get along? Would I be able to handle him bringing girlfriends home someday? I wondered what his relationship with his daddy would be like. Would they be close? Would he love music like Dad? Would they have the same silly sense of humor? But all of those musings and dreams were ripped away from me. Instead, I wondered that one big question: how long will he be with us? So now it was time to create and live our new normal. We had to accept this condition, PCH, into our lives and learn how to keep moving forward. We were, after all, a family. There wasn't just Clark to look after. We had to make the world keep turning for our sweet and innocent 3-year-old girl. We had to create some form of stability for Lena, because as much as it felt like it, the world had not stopped. Grieving would turn out to be a lifelong process with Clark, but we needed to find a way to compartmentalize it and create a new and beautiful life out of this chaos and fear. We were tested in this ability right from the get-go, having to throw a birthday party for Lena with Clark admitted at the local hospital that day. Back then, I was still trying to be super mom, and Lena's birthday parties involved themed food and handmade cupcakes. I was trying to go on like the woman I'd been before the diagnosis. This may have been the last time I did this, but it was a memory I'm glad I have. Clark had a nasty infection on his finger. We didn't know what it was or where it came from, but took him to our pediatrician. The pediatrician sent us on to the hospital in Cambridge, where we begged to be transferred to Kitchener so that I could be close enough to somehow still throw this birthday party for Lena. I needed to protect my children, both of them. One was sick and I needed to get him better, but one was turning 4 and I needed her to be celebrated. Both were equally important in my mind. My mother was in town and she started collecting items for the party and parents to help make it happen. As people began to drop off their children, she told them what was happening with Clark and asked if anyone could stay. Once I got Matthew and Clark settled in the hospital room, I rushed home to discover a house full of friends, a house full of love and support, and it lifted me in such a way that I was able to keep pushing and get through that day. That is when I knew that I could share this crazy new normal of ours with everyone in our life. We could let people in, let them love us, let them love Clark and Lena, and fill in the gaps when we were stretched too thin. It was a few months after that magical party that we decided to create Clark Takes on the World. I remember sitting down with Matthew to discuss a Facebook group where we would share our boy, his struggles, his triumphs, everything. We weren't able to be out in public as much as we once had. We needed a way to reach out and keep people in our lives without actually physically seeing them. Our grief made it hard for us to see our friends, see their children navigating the world of schoolyards and playgrounds while we navigated the world of hospitals and medical changes. I didn't want this site to be a place that people would come and pity us, though. It needed to portray the love and pride we had for Clark. The first thing to do was come up with a strong name that put forth our intentions. We came up with Clark Takes on the World because it challenged us not to give up on our child and everyone else to stand up and cheer him on as he took on PCH. And it worked. Clark Takes on the World saved us. It gave us a safe place to say, this is who Clark is. He's a part of your community, and we challenge you to not only accept him, but love and welcome him. When you see us on the street, come up and say hello. Clark is more than his diagnosis. He is a little boy that needs a community to rally around him just as much as you and I. We put ourselves out there fully and asked the world to let us in, and they did. Today, Clark has over 1,000 followers. Hundreds of people have joined with us in celebrating every accomplishment Clark ever made. That world also gathered around us in the most difficult times, in the hospital stays, when the seizures came, when they sent us out so much love and healing, and we could feel that, he could feel that, and it got us all through. Those words, those Facebook comments were so powerful, and I felt them, and I cherished them, and I used them to keep myself going. When I thought I had no fight left in me, I would go to Clark Takes on the World and recharge so that I could face another scary and unpredictable day. When Clark was about 6 months old, we joined an online support group for families living with children with PCH. It's a hard step to take. My friend had discovered the group on Facebook months before, but I didn't think I could handle seeing what the disease looked like in other kids, what other children were struggling with, and worst of all, seeing children pass away. It was Christmas time when I finally got the courage to join. Within minutes, I was flooded with welcomes and words of support. This was a safe place to make connections and for the first time in 6 months not feel so all alone in the world. I had found my tribe of parents who would teach me how to fight for my son. They brought out my mama bear, and for that I am thankful. With a disease like PCH, you, the parent, quickly become the expert. It's a scary time when we reach the point when we knew more than the doctors, and we learned it all from these parents who walked the path before us. We were given ideas for medications and therapies to try. We built relationships with people all over the world and helped each other through the worst moments of our lives. Now that we had our friends and an online community behind us, we had to start the fight to get the care and support that Clark would need to be comfortable in his little body. He was often in pain, and for the first year he cried and spasmed uncontrollably most of the time. Matthew and I had some pretty tough decisions to make as we went forward, and I asked him to do something that I knew would not be easy, to take a leave of absence from his job. We had much to learn about caring for a sick child, and I had read the statistics on special needs marriages. It was bleak. I didn't want to lose our marriage or the friendship that we built together. I needed him to live this new life with me, so that when he did go back to work, he would understand what exactly was going on at home. We had to learn how to do it together, so that we both knew how demanding this role of caregiver would be, so that there was mutual respect between us, and so that we didn't grow to resent each other. We sent Lena off to JK every day and set out to learn about Clark. We began reaching out to all of the different supports we could find in the community. We soon found the infant development specialist of the Waterloo region, who turned out to be our first saving grace. Joan came into our lives and joined our team. She immediately came into our home and gave us support and reassurance that we were doing everything right. She came to Kidsability with us, and when that didn't work, she got us connected with CCAC. CCAC was a tough battle, and where I first learned to put on my boxing gloves and fight for my kid. You see, Clark didn't fit very well into the forms. They are set up to help our elderly population who can no longer care for themselves. So when they walked into the scene with a 6-month-old baby, they didn't see why they should help us. No baby is able to dress or feed itself, so why should we qualify for extra care for Clark? He didn't require any tubes or machines to help him survive, so he didn't qualify for nursing care. But Clark required someone to hold him 24/7. Matthew would soon be returning to work, and I myself had been living with fibromyalgia since I was 16. The pain of holding Clark in the vice grip that he needed for comfort, hours on end, was excruciating for me. We did have my mother around for about a month, but my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer soon after Clark's diagnosis, and she had to return home to care for him. With no other family close by, we had nowhere to turn. It was time to fight for services. We had our CCA caseworker come to our home to see how difficult caring for Clark really was. We had to prove that we couldn't do it alone, and that was a humbling experience. We had to show her the worst of the worst. We had to beg and cry and show her our son in pain so that she would fight for us, and fight for us she did. She found a way to get us a personal support worker to come in for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. She helped us qualify for financial aid because, let's face it, although Clark was not dependent on tubes or machines, he was a very medically fragile little boy. This was a baby who needed morphine for teething pain and the most powerful reflex meds on the market to try to help with his constant vomiting. We went through 5 or 6 PSWs before I was able to let a stranger hold my baby for me. I was struggling to admit that I couldn't care for my son on my own. I had to let go of a lot of guilt in order to accept help. Eventually, we met Leslie, and she was our life raft in stormy waters. She was kind and loving and willing to learn how to be us when we couldn't be us anymore. She became Clark's second mom. He loved her, and so did I. She let me turn off for a few hours and rest with the knowledge that my son was safe in another person's loving arms. Now that we had some home care in place, we were better able to focus on Clark's overall comfort. He had recently started some home therapy with a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist, and was also seen by a dietitian, a CNIB specialist, social worker, and of course infant development. There were a lot of people in and out of our house. We had a revolving door of sorts. I got used to it pretty quickly though. These therapists soon became my link to the outside world and my only form of socialization. I grew quite close to them. We had a lovely team who all grew to care for Clark and cheer him on, but I could see that it wasn't helping with his pain and we needed an alternative. I had heard of a therapy online called the Anat Baniel Method, or ABM, which a loving friend researched for me and discovered a practitioner quite literally around the corner from us. I was so excited. The only problem was the financial barrier. I wasn't working, Matthew wasn't working, and our social worker had just encouraged us to start thinking of an accessible home for Clark. This was when we decided we would need to reach out to our community and do some fundraising. When we began to plan, we were met with an outpouring of support. Friends, family, and even strangers began collecting items we would sell in an online auction, and the fundraiser began to grow. It was soon picked up by the local press. I went on the CBC Morning Show to share Clark's story. CTV came into our home to do a news segment about him, and The Record did a story about Clark and his fundraiser. It was a very surreal time. We went from hiding in a cocoon of grief to being thrown into the local spotlight. But it got the exposure we needed both for PCH awareness and our fundraiser. With the proceeds from the fundraiser and the sale of our current home, we were able to put a down payment on an accessible home for Clark, buy a van that was big enough to cart around all of his equipment, and pay for a year of ABM therapy. The ABM was life-changing for Clark and in turn for us. The therapy consists of a week-long intensive, twice a day. Karen, his practitioner, was taking Clark's body through the instinctual movements that a baby would do naturally if they were typically developing. The idea was so simple, teaching his body movement, step by step, but in a non-invasive and gentle way. He responded so well. It was like watching him wake up and realize he was in his body and he had some control over it. He became a different baby. He was actually happy in between episodes of pain. He could at times relax and laugh and play. It was an exciting new time. His brain was turned on and he was learning. Unfortunately, there was still pain in between these happy moments. There was pain in the form of dystonia, acid reflux, and difficulty sleeping. We still needed to find medical support to help Clark be as comfortable as possible. I had broached the subject of palliative care with our pediatrician, but he insisted that Clark didn't qualify because he was not end of life. I was frustrated by this answer and went straight to our neurologist at Sick Kids. I insisted that we be followed by palliative care, as I knew from other parents that this was the support we needed. My pleas were heard, and we soon met our new team packed. Now let me pause for a moment to make sure that everyone understands that palliative care no longer means end-of-life care. Pediatric palliative care is specialized medical care for children with serious illness. It focuses on providing relief from the symptoms, pain, and stress of a serious illness, whatever the diagnosis. The goal is to improve quality of life for both the child and the family. More specifically, at Sick Kids, PAC provides inpatient community and family consultations, collaborative community care, intensive symptom management, psychosocial and spiritual support, music therapy, bereavement counseling, and financial support. Finally, we had a team of doctors that were helping us on a range of different levels. Not only did they want to help Clark get better, but they wanted us to survive as a family. They helped us adjust all of Clark's meds to get him as comfortable as possible, and then they encouraged us to stop and take a look at our own health. I learned about a term that was quite new to me but described my life to a T: anticipatory grief, a grief reaction that occurs before an impending loss. I was caring for a child with a life-limiting illness, but because PCH was so rare, no one could give me any idea of how long Clark would live. That is a huge burden to live with, and PACT encouraged us to get some support in place for ourselves. I started some personal counseling, and Matthew and I together began marriage counseling. This was the best thing we could have done for our relationship because, let's face it, caring for a special needs child is much like living on a battlefield. You never know what's coming next and things change quickly. This creates incredible amounts of stress. It was amazingly helpful to have a third and neutral party to listen to us and teach us how to better communicate with each other. Everyone deals with grief and stress differently, and we needed to be told that that was okay. We had almost 3 incredibly amazing years with Clark, though it will never feel like enough. Once we got him happy and more comfortable, we began to make his life as full as possible. We continued to share all of his triumphs with the world on his Facebook page. Clark had many favorite activities, including swimming, reading, and music. Daddy and Clark had a very special musical bond. He was very particular about his music. He preferred live music, and guitar was nowhere near as good as banjo. Clark had a shining personality that everyone around him was sucked into. He had fans wherever we went. When out in public, people would approach us and ask, "Is that Super Clark?" It was a pretty awesome feeling. We could feel and see the love this little boy left in his wake. I was so proud to be his mother. As his health improved, we were transferred back to Kids Ability, where his therapies would continue and where he would be introduced to speech therapy. At the time, I didn't know what speech therapy could offer Clark. I knew he was intelligent despite his brain abnormalities because he had learned how to sign for breastfeeding and also to sign for more. He would learn anything that meant more food in his belly. He loved to eat. Clark immediately fell in love with his speech therapist and would do almost anything she wanted. He soon learned how to accurately press a button that was pre-programmed with words. He could participate in the reading of a story, the singing of a song, and of course the verbal request for more food. There's nothing short of miraculous. Clark should not have been able to have this level of intelligence with his condition, but no one ever told Clark what he could or couldn't do. We had so many adventures with this brilliant special boy. We gave him all of the experiences that any other little boy would get. He got to go to a fair and ride all of the rides. He got to go to the farm in his upsee, an apparatus to let him walk upright attached to us and pet the animals. Daddy took him for skateboard rides and Mommy took him for swims in Georgian Bay. He did it all and he lived a very full life. Clark went downhill very quickly. He got a horrible flu bug in the winter of last year that seemed to shut down his entire digestive system, and we couldn't keep on top of his pain. In his final week, we were transferred by ambulance to sick kids, but no one there could find the source of his pain. The only suggestion was that we sedate him with pain meds until he was comfortable and hope that in time he would need less and less and the pain would resolve itself. Instead, we couldn't give him enough meds to keep him comfortable. He needed so much medication that his heart rate and breathing were compromised. We had our palliative care team with us the whole time, and they helped us go through our options. No one could promise us that they could find a solution to whatever was causing Clark's pain. Something had changed, but no one knew what. They could add new beds and surgeries that may or may not do anything to help, but those options would most definitely change the way Clark lived his life. As we were having this discussion with our doctors outside of Clark's room, we saw the code team rush in. His respiratory rate was so low that they had to counteract his medicines and bring him back. But to us, in that moment, he finally looked at peace. We knew then that if it took so much medication to relieve his pain that his heart was moments away from stopping, it was time to let go. Matthew and I always made a promise to ourselves and to Clark that we wouldn't let him suffer, and we wouldn't change the way he lived his life just so we could keep him with us. It was the most heartbreaking decision the both of us have ever had to make, but definitely the most selfless. After we told the team our decision, we were asked where we would like to spend Clark's final days. There was the option of staying at the hospital, going home, or going into hospice care at a place called Emily's House. Emily's House was a children's hospice that the palliative care team had previously encouraged us to use as a place for respite. The idea of staying in the hospital was definitely not an option for me, and I didn't want to take Clark all the way home where we wouldn't have any medical support. I wanted to go to a place that was safe and calm, a place where we could be together as a family in one room, Clark, Matthew, Lena, and I together. No other worries than being with our son. Emily's House gave us that, and it was a beautiful gift. Clark only spent one night and one day at Emily's House, but they were so full. We were allowed to do whatever we needed to find comfort in those final hours together. We had all of our family with us, and we did some of Clark's favorite things. We were able to bring him outside, his favorite place to be. Just happened to be the first warm day of spring, and we knew he would love to feel the warmth of the sun on his face. We passed him around to all of the arms that had ever loved him. Many special people made the trip to Toronto to say goodbye. We made memory artwork with his handprints and ours. A professional photographer was brought in to capture one last family photo shoot. And when evening came and I had an overwhelming urge to climb into the tub with him, the nurses made it happen. Bath time was always special between Clark and I. I didn't know that it would be our last bath together, but I had a feeling that I needed to do it right then and there. Daddy washed Clark as I sang to him, and it was a beautiful moment that I will never forget. Clark didn't fight to stay. Shortly after our bath, as I lay cuddled in bed with him, I noticed his breathing start to change. I called in the nurses, and they then called in all of our family. Matthew climbed into bed and held us both as I sang all of Clark's favorite songs. At one point I stopped and looked down and knew that he had gone. It was as if he had just fallen asleep on my chest, so peaceful. His death, much like his birth, came quickly, peacefully, and beautifully. Both were a gift to us as a family. We did not have to watch him suffer. He just let go with love and no fear. When we returned home from the hospice to our home in Kitchener, we were met with the full embrace of the community as they showed us how much they loved and would remember Clark. On trees and front porches all around our neighborhood hung denim ribbons. These ribbons symbolize rare disease, something I would promote every February on Rare Disease Day. This was an incredibly thoughtful and powerful way to honor the little life that was lost. For months afterwards, meals would arrive daily on our front porch, and cards and gifts of sympathy were plenty. It was plain for us to see how many lives Clark had touched and how far his love had spread. I thought about Clark leaving a lot. However, when I imagined that time without him, it just looked dark, full of pain and fear. I saw myself curled up in a little ball in a dark room, never leaving my house and disconnecting from the world. Instead, when Clark passed on, it felt like he left his strength behind in me. I felt it as soon as he slipped away in my arms, leaving me with one final gift, the gift to keep going in the face of unspeakable loss. I'm not going to lie, a piece of me died with him that day, and that piece will forever be missing, because how can you fill a hole that big? But now, there are new pieces. I now feel a purpose and passion I never did before. I want to continue Clark's legacy of love and acceptance for all. I want to honor my child's memory in any way I can. The first time I was able to do this was with his memorial service. When I thought of celebrating Clark, it could never be in a funeral home. It needed to be in a place that represented the vibrant life that we were remembering, and it needed to be somewhere that he loved. We decided to do it at Steckley Heritage Farm, a little place just outside of town with a beautiful orchard and animals for everyone to touch and heal with. I wanted this to be an event that anyone who loved Clark could attend, and a funeral that people wouldn't be afraid to bring their children to. I wanted to make death accessible to the children in our community in a way that wasn't scary. It was a beautiful day with the sun shining through the clouds mid-service, Clark shining through. There were over 300 people there with tons of kids, lots of animals, and so much love. I never thought the day that I would say goodbye to my son could be so healing, but we found a way. We also found a way a couple of months later to celebrate his birthday. In the past, we had a giant party inviting the whole community to come and celebrate him, and we felt that is still what we wanted. But this year we would make it a fundraiser for his therapy center, Kidsability. We asked that everyone come enjoy a barbecue and remember Clark with us, bringing a toonie to support other families that were caring for children just like Clark. We raised almost $2,000 that day, and were comforted that people weren't going on with their lives and forgetting about Clark. He continued to be loved and celebrated. I wanted others going through a similar journey to ours to feel that same love and support of the community, and I sat down to try and figure out how I could make that happen. I know our region is lacking in support for special needs families, especially when the child is in need of palliative and hospice care. I thought about what would have helped us most to get through the most difficult days, and my mind kept wandering back to Emily's house. That hospice was such a gift to us, and I couldn't stop thinking, what if we could create something like that here? A place not just for end-of-life care, but also a place of respite for families. A place they could come relax together to get away from the day-to-day stresses of caring for a medically complex child. I also envisioned it being a center where we could have programs for families through the day, playgroups just like typical families have that didn't exist. Things that could create a sense of normalcy in a hectic world and a way for special needs families to connect with each other. The UK has a beautiful organization called Together for Short Lives, and I love what that represents, and I so desperately want that mentality implemented here. I'm still trying to get other agencies in the region to climb on board with my dream, but I'm aware that it will take time. However, I took this idea to Kidsability, and while they couldn't make a hospice happen overnight, they were more than happy to provide some of the day programming until something larger could come into existence. This began Kaleidoscope Kids, a program I created with Kidsability and the Waterloo Regional Family Network. It's a simple idea, but so necessary. It's a drop-in program every Friday at Kidsability in Waterloo. I got to set the rules, so I made sure that it's low-key, no pressure, no registration, and easily accessible for all families with special needs children and their siblings. It is just a safe place to come and hang out and have adult conversation for a morning. It gives parents the ability to sit in a room of people who understand their life and a place where hopefully connections can be made. I've also begun volunteering for an organization called Breastfeeding Buddies in hopes that my experience and struggles in breastfeeding a child who wasn't supposed to be able to suck and swallow can encourage others to try and give their babies the best food possible. I am hoping I will be connected with and can support special needs families in their breastfeeding journeys because I know as of yet that support doesn't exist in our healthcare system. Clark breastfed for 2.5 years, and I truly believe that it helped with his health and development. On Monday, the 6-month anniversary of Clark's death, a buddy bench in Clark's memory will be installed in my daughter's school. A buddy bench is a new trend that has been popping up in schoolyards all over the country. It's a bench that a child can go and sit on if they're feeling alone and cannot find a friend. The other children in the school know what a child on the bench signifies, and the idea is that others come to ask that child to play. To me, there is no better way of giving back to our community the gift they gave us. They held us up in our darkest time. With their kindness and their generosity, we in kind hope to give the gift of empathy and belonging to their children in the form of the Super Clark Buddy Bench, spreading love and acceptance forever and always. Thank you for listening to my story today. I hope that you are able to share in the power that one special little life can create. What I have learned in this life is that if you ask, people will travel that unknown and scary path with you as much as they can. If you ask, people will celebrate with you and cheer you on. If you ask, people will love a child that is different and even let their lives be inspired by his or her struggles and triumphs.